hey there, it's Silver. This is Pacific Drive. So this is technically a survival game, kind of, but just not in the traditional sense. And the whole idea is that you are in a very specific part of the Pacific Northwest, in the state of Washington, actually. And in this case, something really strange has been happening in this specific area that's simply termed the Zone. And no one knows exactly what happened here, but it's sort of become your job to find out, not because you wanted to, but because you kind of got trapped here. Basically, in this place, there's been some government experimentation and cover-up and some other fun stuff, and reality doesn't quite work right here. In fact, it doesn't really seem to work at all. And for the most part, this whole entire area has been sort of decommissioned, so you're not going to be finding tons of bodies and stuff like that. This is not a post-apocalyptic setting. This is a setting where this area has been abandoned, but there are still a few people that are left over that kind of just remained here for one reason or another and are still trying to sort of eke out a living. And in the case of you seem to be a sort of delivery driver who was making some sort of mysterious delivery when they got sucked into the Zone. Now, this place is walled from the outside, so most people can't actually get in. You can't just wander in here whenever you want, but once you're in here, it's also really, really difficult to get out. Your original car is taken from you by an anomaly. There are many different kinds of anomalies that you'll find, but you happen across a station wagon, an old car that happens to be something called a remnant, and a remnant is sort of like an object, an artifact that contains some of the power of this place in usually very mysterious ways. The problem is that remnants are often very unpredictable, and they also effectively drive the person who finds them insane, slowly over time, making them obsess over the remnant more and more until they basically break down and completely lose touch with reality. As you arrive with this car, you will get a radio, and it's a one-way radio. You can't speak through it, so your character doesn't actually talk, but other people do notice that you're here, some of the residents of this place that stuck around, and basically the story becomes about trying to solve the mystery of what actually happened in this zone, while at the same time trying to secure your own passage back out of the zone so that you can go back to your normal life. And all of the gameplay centers around this car. You can get out and walk around whenever you want to, and you will need to at various times, but most of the game mechanics are centered on the car, and this game has really taken that to an extreme, to the point that almost every aspect of the vehicle is simulated in some way to give you more to do. So even really simple stuff that's normally automatic in games, like having to turn on the wipers when it rains, or having to turn on your headlights in a dark tunnel, things like that are all manual. You have to actually choose to do them. And the game has a really good sense of atmosphere, which I'll go into later, but the first thing to talk about would be that sense of coziness that the game actually gives you, because it uses a really pleasant art style. It's got kind of a simple look to it, where everything is relatively smooth, but it still uses some pretty complex textures and stuff, so it's not like hyper-stylized, cel-shaded or anything like that. It's just a little bit more simplistic, and it looks really nice. But these more simply textured objects and things really help to blend in with stuff like really impressive fog and weather effects and stuff to give the area this nice, abandoned, isolated, sort of spooky vibe. Now, this is not a horror game, however, I would say that it is horror adjacent at times, because even though it's not trying to be in your face and there are no jump scares or loud monsters or anything like that, there are moments of very effective tension and atmosphere where just really creepy, odd stuff happens. You might be going through fog and barely be able to see 5 feet in front of you, or you may have some noises that happen just outside of your vision, and you're not sure what made them or where it went or if it was even a thing at all, but something made them. And I think the thing that perfectly encapsulates this idea the most are the tourists. One of the various anomalies that you'll be finding as you explore through the zone are tourists, and they look like mannequins or like crash test dummies when you actually get up close to them, but they don't move. They just sort of appear, and they have a nasty tendency of appearing wherever you're not looking in almost an instant, so that you'll look back and there they are all of a sudden out of nowhere, and they scare the crap out of you, not because they're loud and scary, but because they weren't there just half a second ago, and suddenly there's 10 of them, and you don't know where they came from. Now, these things are static, they're not going to chase you, but they're not exactly harmless either, because they have a tendency to explode if you touch them, quite violently in fact, and it will do a lot of damage to your car if you hit them, so ideally you want to be giving them a nice wide berth and staying away from them. And as you go through the game, you'll come across more types of tourists, like ones that arc electricity in between them and things like that make them even more dangerous, but you can also set them off remotely by doing things like throwing a road flare at them. So the relatively subtle horror of just turning around and suddenly there are all these mannequins just sort of chilling there where you're almost positive just a second ago they weren't there, that's the kind of horror experience that this game goes for. Rather than being a traditional horror game, it's a survival game, but it earns its moments of scariness or of spookiness by building atmosphere, sometimes taking a very long time to build atmosphere with strange sounds. I found that a lot of times some of the atmospheric noises that you'll hear while exploring blend into the music in the background sometimes, and it makes it hard to tell exactly what you're hearing or if it was even something that was important, but you know you heard something. And the cockpit of your car has a really cozy feel to it. You've got all these really nice readouts and gauges and stuff. It basically tells you everything you need to know, the condition of every panel and door on the car, the status of your tires, how much battery you have and whether it's being drained, your speed and your fuel, and all that stuff is all presented in a really nice diegetic heads-up display that is just super cozy and fun, and exploring through the areas in this nice, safe car feels really good, especially during moments of things like storms, when it's raining and you have the rain beating down on the hood of the car. You can hear it on the windshield. You have to maybe activate your wipers so that you can see where you're going, and you're just sort of peeling through this dense rainstorm with some nice fog effects and stuff. It's a really cozy feeling that's also simultaneously creepy and just sort of generally unsettling and a bit alien and isolating at the same time. So the main gameplay loop is that you will start in a safe area. You have this sort of safe hub area that is an auto shop. It allows you to repair your car and refuel and do all that sort of maintenance stuff. And then you can choose a route. And when you choose a route, you select the general direction that you want to go. However, you don't always go there after a single loading screen, because the deeper you go into the zone, the weirder things get, but also the more different junctions or open areas you have to drive through to get there. So you may have like a 4-junction deep area that you need to get to, so you're going to have to go through 4 separate sort of large open areas with all their own hazards and ways through. So you'll leave this nice safe auto shop and then end up in the first area that you chose. And the thing about the exploration and stuff is you're sort of supposed to do it in stages, where you're deciding how much time and how many resources you want to spend on actually exploring different areas. Because as you're driving through these roads, you'll find various side roads and houses and labs and all sorts of stuff that you can stop and loot for materials and other important bits. But you might not necessarily want to stop every single time, because this is the zone, and there's always the constant threat of something going wrong. You can have a sudden appearance of an anomaly around you that completely changes how you need to explore the area, like, say, giant saw blades cutting through the ground out of nowhere, or a huge expanding bubble of high radiation that you need to avoid so that you don't get irradiated by it. The weather is also very unpredictable and can whip up a sudden storm out of nowhere, but there's also a second type of storm that you have to be aware of, one that comes along with a loud siren whenever it is approaching, and the sort of map, the ARC device in the passenger seat of your car, it acts as your map as well as your warning for when these storms are approaching. And these storms are not exactly your traditional ones, but rather they're effectively reality collapsing in on itself, and you really don't want to get caught in one. First, a yellow wave will sweep through the area, closing in on where you are, closing more and more of it off around you in like a circle. And this is doable. You can survive this part because it's basically a radiation storm at this stage. As long as you stay in your car and your car is in good condition, it will protect you from the not too much radiation that this part of the storm will generate. But then a red area of the storm will sweep in around all the areas that were previously covered, and that you do not want to get caught in, because this is basically reality restructuring itself, and if you get caught in it, you'll take constant damage very, very rapidly, as well as your car taking constant damage. And even if your car is in really good shape, it still manages to damage you through it, so you can't stay in it for very long. You can survive it if you absolutely have to for a very short period of time if you're about to escape, but that's about it. And all of this is also linked into how you return to safety once you're done with a mission. Because reality restructures itself constantly, you can't just drive backwards and end up right where you were. Instead, you have to teleport back home. But teleporting back home takes a special kind of energy called anchor energy, and you'll find it in 3 different varieties, that being stable, unstable, and corrupted, each one being more and more dangerous progressively to obtain. you'll need to find these anchor sort of ball things that will generate around the area. Your map will show where they are, although it won't exactly show which type they are necessarily at first. And there are also some special conditions where it instead doesn't show you where they are and you have to find them manually, although you can get a radar that you can, a handheld radar to use to find them easier. And these, you just walk up to them, rip the ball off the pedestal, and run it back to your car and shove it in your passenger seat as fast as you can. And you do need to be fast because, for one, these things are radioactive, so you can't hold on to them for very long. And two, as soon as you remove one from its pedestal, the zone seems to kind of know what you're doing and conspires to stop you. So it's not uncommon to rip one off of the pedestal, turn around 180 degrees to go back to your car, and suddenly there's a whole field of tourists where previously it was just an open field. Now you have to sort of zigzag through a whole bunch of dangerous stuff. That's just how it works, so you need to be careful about all these emerging anomalies and stuff that'll be happening around you while you're trying to cart this ball back to your car. Each different junction, that being the open areas that you drive through, each one will have a different amount of energy that you need to actually teleport back home. So you don't only need to get one of these big orbs. Sometimes you need multiple. It depends on how much energy you need. But once you fill up the gauge on the right of your map, you'll be able to choose an area that you're not too close to spawn a portal. And these look like big cylinders of light from the sky. They actually look very dangerous, like you don't want to touch them, but you do want to touch them. All you got to do is drive to it and you'll get back home. But as soon as you activate one of these portals, a storm will approach and reality will start to restructure itself, so the drivable area gets smaller and smaller as the storm gets closer and closer, so you need to make it to this portal as fast as you can. Make it to the light and you'll be teleported back to the auto shop nice and safe, and you'll get to keep all of the various things that you gathered. You do have a set of boxes in your trunk, and you can just put a whole bunch of gear and all the crap that you find in your trunk to take it back home. You also have a backpack, and the itemization in this game is all based around the physical space that things take up, not weight. So everything takes up a certain number of grid spaces, and you can rotate all these around to fit them into the grid that you have both in your trunk and on your back. Also in the trunk you have a basic crafting table that allows you to make some simple stuff like resource gathering tools and repair putty and things like that you might need while out exploring. Once you teleport away from an area successfully, that area will sort of solidify and you can then return to it later on, and it'll be basically the same junction over again. So this means by exploring the zone and then teleporting back from each junction, you're kind of solidifying a web of areas that will stay that way so that you can actually have a stable and safe path through. Taking care of your car is a full-time job because it does degrade quite quickly while out exploring, because you'll be hitting stuff and the weather will be bad and anomalies will sweep through, so you will take damage. And every piece of the car can actually take damage individually. So all four doors, your trunk, your hood, the various body panels, your engine, all four wheels, your gas tank, and the ability to actually hold gas in it. And also if your various bits of external storage get damaged, then you can actually start to lose stuff that you put in it. It'll actually fall out. And you do need headlights as well, because things do get very dark and foggy, so you do need some light to be able to see where you're going, but it's always a choice as to when to turn them on because they do drain your battery. So you gotta be careful about that. And things can go wrong in various different ways, from the obvious just things get damaged sometimes aspect where, collisions and explosions and anomalies and stuff will physically damage parts and they need to be repaired with stuff like repair putty, or sometimes a blowtorch that you can get later on that's extremely useful. Sometimes things just get worn out and there actually isn't a fix for this. You just have to replace it wholesale. Your headlight may get worn out and start flickering constantly and barely be able to stay on. Sometimes it could short out because you took some electrical damage, in which case you can craft an electrician's kit to actually repair it. But sometimes stuff just gets worn and you can't fix that. You have to just replace it instead. Tires can wear out, they can get bald and actually stop having good traction. They can pop, of course, and go flat. They can completely get shredded if you stay on a flat tire for too long and need the entire thing replaced. When it's first flattened, you can use a sealing kit to actually fix it, but if you continue to drive on it without fixing it, then it'll tear it up. You can even have really specific things go wrong, like a spark plug misfire that causes your car to not start correctly sometimes, so you have to actually pop the hood and get down to the engine and actually fix it that way. Some of the stuff that can go wrong is actually kind of funny, like having doors just rip right off sometimes, like in mid-flight from an anomaly or something is kind of funny, although a little bit scary at the same time. You can even have wheels become loose, and you can fix this if you catch it in time, but if you don't, then they'll actually just straight up fall off in motion. There's also a really interesting system that helps to underline the fact that this is not a normal car and this is not a normal place, called quirks. And as you're exploring, you will collect quirks, but it won't tell you. Instead, you have to notice them. Basically, a quirk is something weird about the way that your car operates that makes something work wrong, or something goes wrong. Sometimes it's really innocuous, like say every time you open your passenger door, it closes your trunk, or something silly like that. But sometimes it's something a lot more dangerous, like every time you reverse, your hood pops up and you can't see where you're going. And they can have some really specific and hard to notice details sometimes too, like every time you turn your wheel left for too long, it starts to drain your battery or something specific like that. So these are things that you've got to really be on the lookout for. They help you understand the car better. You start to feel like it's its own character, basically, and you have to understand how it works and how it's supposed to operate and get used to all of its little eccentricities and stuff so that you know when something isn't working right or something is going wrong. And the way that it works is you have to actually diagnose these quirks manually with a computer. You go to a computer and it shows you all the various things that can go wrong, and you have to guess correctly. Basically, you get like 8 guesses every time you go back to the auto shop, and you can buy more by bringing home energy, because when you teleport back home, any excess energy over the amount that it took to teleport is actually stored, and you use this for upgrades and things. But yeah, you basically play a guessing game to try and figure out what's actually going wrong with the car. And if you manage to get all 4 slots correct, all correct guesses, then it will say that that's the quirk, that you successfully found the problem, and then it'll suggest a consumable or some sort of item that you need to craft in order to solve it. And you return to that terminal once you have the items in your inventory, and then you'll be able to fix it permanently. There's also a lot in the way of upgrades and progression for both your car and for the auto shop. There's this sort of blueprint machine that you can access that uses, this is where you use all that excess energy that you gather in order to purchase new upgrades, and you also need a whole bunch of resources and stuff too, so this is like where a lot of the resource grind comes from. And you can unlock a huge amount of stuff, from new storage at the auto shops, so you can store more stuff, to new types of stations or upgraded stations that do their job better, even stuff that allows you to do things like place auto parts in this sort of storage bay that get automatically repaired the next time you're on a drive. So you can have a selection of kind of high value parts that you swap out and keep repaired this way. And as for your car, you can get all sorts of stuff, like a better engine or a better battery. You can get side and roof racks to mount extra stuff, like extra battery chargers that can absorb lightning strikes, or extra fuel tanks that are mounted externally to give you more range. There are various types of panels you can make indoors as well, from basic crude stuff that's actually held together by duct tape, like literally you have to use duct tape to make it, to stuff like more steel panels or armored panels or insulated panels that can absorb electricity better, or lead panels that can absorb radiation really well, and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can upgrade and kit out your car that are fit for specific kinds of anomalies and things that you'll be finding as you explore. There are even activatable abilities that you can bind to 4 different buttons at a time while you're kitting out your car. One of these is a sort of bumper that causes a pulse to fly out of the car, sort of like an EMP kind of effect, and it detaches any of the various nasty things that can latch onto your car, because there's a whole bunch of different kinds of anomalies that can attach to it and do some really unpleasant stuff, like the various kinds of bunnies, which are sort of like pieces of scrap metal and stuff in like a tumbleweed kind of formation, but they seem to be sentient and can actually follow you around and will latch onto your car and cause all sorts of various effects depending on what kind of bunny it is. And then there are these abductor things that can sort of suction a tentacle onto your car and lift you all around the place and put you up a tree or something. And there are these really adorable things called bubblegum buddies that are sort of like jellyfish that can pull you off the road and do all sorts of unpleasant stuff to you. So having the ability to detach stuff from your car with the press of a button is really nice, although it does of course come at the cost of some battery to use. And then of course there's the element of the story, and the story in this game is actually pretty cool because it's presented in a very impressive way, in my opinion. The voice acting for the characters that you'll be talking to, or that will be talking to you rather, is really, really good voice acting. It's sincere and human feeling. It all feels kind of like they're all in the same room talking to each other. So you've got various different characters that'll all talk to you over the radio and talk to each other, and some of them really don't like each other. Pretty much all of them don't like each other, honestly, at first, but it sort of changes as you go through, and everyone kind of has their own agenda and their own reasons for wanting you to succeed while also trying to help you. Ophelia, in particular, I think is a really good character because she starts off as like this crotchety old woman who is like just really angry at everything and loves isolation and hates all humans. But eventually you start to, it gets explained why she's like this and what happened to her husband and how long she's been here, and the fact that she was like the most brilliant scientist on the entire team at this place, and is also curious as to what went wrong and what's actually been happening. And she has a lot of interest in the stuff that you're finding as you go through the story, because she wants to know what happened and, you know, basically why her husband died, like what he died for, what all of this research was leading to. And she makes for a very human, very understandable character because of that. She feels very genuine, and her performance is extremely good, and that goes for all of the characters. There are 3 main characters that are going to be talking to you, and they all have just phenomenal voice acting and a really good sense of emotional weight behind their words. They all sound kind of tired and a little bit confused, but also sort of excited at the prospect of something new finally happening in this place where nothing works right. And I think it's actually an easy story to get invested in, because it's a story that you've seen before in a way. You know, the whole crazy government cover-up of experimental science happening somewhere in a place that no one acknowledges the existence of. This is all stuff that we've seen in video games before, but I don't think I've ever seen it done quite like this. I imagine there was definitely some influence of books like Roadside Picnic when it came to the creation of the zone for this game, but this is very much its own thing and does not feel like an adaptation of any other piece of media that I've seen or read. And a lot of that uniqueness is down to how good the performances are and how believable the performances are of the characters that are speaking, and how interesting it is to explore just from the perspective of trying to document all of these anomalies and figure out what you're even looking at sometimes. Pacific Drive is, in my opinion, one of those once-in-a-while kinds of games that does something really interesting really well, and then becomes a sort of indie darling for a long time afterwards. Games like Papers, Please or Valhalla come to mind as a similar kind of concept, where we're talking about a game that is very different from its peers and does something very unique and quite new, and has this really humanizing story and set of characters that makes it really fascinating the whole way through. So I don't really want to be showing anything farther into the game than what I have, and I don't want to be talking about anything farther into the game than what I have, because it very quickly gets into some super spoiler territory, and I'm not going to do that because this is a really good story, and I don't want to spoil it for people. Suffice to say, I think this is a phenomenal game that's absolutely fantastic and sets out to do something really unique and does it extremely well. The car maintenance gameplay is unexpectedly really addicting, and the coziness of just driving around in your comfy cockpit where you know what every button does and what every screen means is hard to overstate. But the incredible sense of atmosphere that the game gives through exploration and through the dialogue and everything, it creates this really fascinating world that I wanted to see the end of. I want to keep seeing more of, because there's some really cool stuff happening. If the game had any weakness, I would say that it's also its strength, which is that it focuses on a very specific gameplay loop. It mostly does driving, and it does exploring and crafting, and it does this sort of survival driving gameplay. That's what it does. It doesn't do anything else. So if you're up for that, and if that sounds interesting to you, then I would say absolutely pick up Pacific Drive, because it is a really, really fun time. But if you're not sure if that's for you, then you might not find what you want here, because that is mostly what it does and nothing else. So it's both a good and a bad thing in a way. I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Pacific Drive, so you can go and check it out. Please do so. It is a really good time, and if you're at all a fan of survival stuff, then you'll probably really enjoy it. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.